The year is 2010. A man walks into an air-conditioned office. He'd been in many offices like this over the past few months. He's carrying a 4-foot by 8-foot map, the contents of which he knows are going to result in confusion, anger, and above all else, fear. Because this isn't just any regular map. No. This map contains some very, very frightening information. Just 2 years earlier, this man used his giant brain to develop a plan. A plan to secretly lay a single 1.5-inch tube of fiber optic cable over 800 miles from New Jersey to Chicago. The cable, he explained, had grown to become his obsession over the past few years. You see, in the early 2000s, the markets were changing rapidly. Computerized trading systems were making gambling more profitable and fun in ways that no one thought possible. A new breed of traders were printing money in ways no one else understood, and some interesting opportunities were becoming apparent to the select few smart enough to see them. Which brings us right to the main character of this story. Dan Spivey was born at a very young age, then had a life where he did things. But one day a thought came to his mind. I think there could be a way to do the stonk faster. And it was this profound revelation that allowed him to facilitate one of the most brilliant examples of legal extortion in the history of the markets. At the time, traders around the country were sending their orders to the exchanges using telecom wires, and while these routes were fast enough for most trading strategies, there were a few highly profitable trades where they posed a huge problem. To give you an example, one trade was arbitrage between an index futures contract that trades on the CME and the underlying stocks that make up the index, which trade on the NASDAQ. Most of the time the futures trade where they should based on the value of the stocks. However, traders observed that every day there are a lot of times when the value of the future gets dislocated enough against the portfolio of stocks to the point where you can buy the stocks and sell the future. Illiterate freaks buying index futures would push the price up, and traders would act as the middlemen between these markets, dispersing the excess demand in the futures market into the supply of the stock market. The spread between the cost of the portfolio of stocks and the profit from selling the future, or vice versa, was a risk-free profit, an incredibly profitable and competitive trade done by the biggest trading firms in the country. In the olden days, humans could manually do these trades, but as the 2000s came around, automated trading systems started to dominate more and more of the markets, and doing this trade required being much faster. This is where Dan's gargantuan genius began. Because he had realized the speed provided by the telecom companies was far from the fastest speed that was theoretically possible. In order to do this trade, you need to be the first to sell the futures and buy the stocks, or buy the futures and sell the stocks. When a trading firm located in Chicago sees the futures go up relative to the stocks, their algorithm races to send a sell order for the futures and a buy order for the stocks. The problem is that the currently available telecom routes from Chicago to New Jersey aren't designed for fast trading, which means the communication speed is very inconsistent. On one day, sending this order might take 8.5 milliseconds. The next day, 10 milliseconds. This led to an incredibly infuriating situation where a trader's algorithm might be the first to get a signal that the price has diverged, but still miss the trade due to their order going through a slower route. This meant quite possibly seeing hundreds of thousands of dollars per day of potential profit, all while being able to capture none of it. If you've ever watched a stock go up every day for 37 months straight after selling it, this is the equivalent for people that graduated from college and have a functional prefrontal cortex. My prefrontal cortex is being studied by science, but I can do this funny British accent to make up for it, so it's all okay, I'm fine. Dan realized if someone had access to a route that was consistently even 1 millisecond faster, he'd have a speed monopoly over the market. A millisecond potentially worth billions of dollars to someone willing to take full advantage of it. So Dan found some maps showing the currently existing fiber optic routes and put together a plan. The CME data center is over here in Chicago, and the NASDAQ data center is over here in New Jersey. Round-trip communication times between both exchanges being anywhere from 15 to 20 milliseconds through the fastest current telecom routes. However, if you apply many complex mathematics as well as geopolitical scientifical science, you'll notice that these lines are not perfectly straight. And if you could do a more straight one instead of a curved one, you'd be able to do the stonk a few milliseconds faster. It was a groundbreaking discovery at the intersection of mathematical scientifics and geopolitical orthogonalytics. Dan estimated he'd be able to make his cable over 100 miles shorter than the cables of the other telecom companies, the straightest path allowed by law, as he described it. And it was this pitch that allowed the eighth wonder of the world to begin construction. Fortunately, the cable would be relatively inexpensive. $300 million being the estimated price to reduce the round-trip communication time between the two data centers by just 3 milliseconds. You see, Dan had realized he who can do a stonk fastest wins a monopoly over the market, a race where being first is the only thing that matters, regardless of if it's by a minute, second, or millisecond. So in 2008, construction of Dan's project began. But unfortunately, his excitement was short-lived, because deep in the recesses of his mind, there was a thought that consumed him. What if somebody else is already out there? Another Dan, digging his own hole with his own cable. Surely he couldn't have been the first person to have such an obviously brilliant idea. There could be hundreds of them, all secretly laying their own cables. What if the cable was already priced in? He was tormented by this thought, which is why it was of the utmost importance to keep anyone from knowing his master plan. The construction crews were never told what the cable was for, only that it needed to be as straight as physically possible. If anyone asked them what they were doing, they were instructed to say they were just laying fiber. If anyone spoke to the media, Dan would just have them assassinated and that was all. 2 years later, the cable had crossed hundreds of miles, and Dan had landed himself in the office of Hudson River Trading, a quantitative trading firm focused on buying and selling the stonk in a very fast and very big way. When Dan explained what he had done, it's an understatement to say they were confused and shocked. But after the initial shock, one question still remained. A question that disturbed them to the core. Why? What do the cable actually do? Obviously, it means you can trade faster, but the cable is only valuable if all of us don't have it. If everybody have cable, nobody have cable. Fortunately, Dan had asked these types of questions many times over the past few months. How will people make money from the cable? How do we sell the cable? How many people will be able to use cable? His conclusion was simple, yet brilliant. It literally doesn't matter. Dan knew that the fear of being the only one without the cable would be enough to drive his customers to insanity. The price would be whatever the most afraid person was willing to pay for it, and FOMO is not something traders do well with. So Dan began his crusade, going to every trading firm and offering them a fair and reasonable deal. For 10 times the amount you're paying now, you can continue to do the same things you have been doing, probably. Wait, so you're saying... If you don't want to, that's okay, we'll just sell the cable to all of your competitors. Richard? That's cool.
Richard?
Why did you invite this man, Richard? I'm moving to South America. Dan found a lot of enjoyment in their pain and anger, and as he'd anticipated, even those who despised him most had no choice but to fork over the roughly $300,000 a month as well as a few million in startup costs to get set up on the cable. You see, while Dan began his journey looking to arbitrage index futures, in the end he was able to arbitrage something much bigger, uncover an inefficiency far deeper, because he realized if he could deliver these precious milliseconds, there would be a substantial spread between their cost and the price at which willing buyers at fair market prices would not be just encouraged, but forced to buy from him.